Welcome. I will talk about one of the common elements found in figures from the world's disparate ancient civilizations, the enigmatic bags. Apart from Mesopotamia, where they appear in reliefs of the Sumerians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Phoenician empires, they also appear in Central American artifacts that predate the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incas, including the Olmec and Toltec empires, and the ancient tribes of Veracruz, if you cross the ocean. But perhaps what surprised us the most was the discovery of the bags at the oldest known human settlement so far, Göbekli Tepe. We are more or less familiar with these different civilizations on 5 continents. We have extensive knowledge about the history and characteristics of some of them. But Göbekli Tepe is a spot full of unknowns for us. Where the builders of Göbekli Tepe came from and how they disappeared without a trace is still unknown. Why did they build ring-shaped structures and then carefully cover them? We are not even sure if they spoke. They probably carved the animals on their thesis attitudes with their appearance during the hunt. We say during the hunt because almost all of the animals were shown with erections. This study, we will try to explain the secret of bags and pine cones and even the reason for their existence by making very strong connections. But there is still one more thing we haven't solved. Most of the figures have objects on their wrists that look very similar to wristwatches. Unfortunately, we still can't explain that. So, let's start the video. What do the handbag symbol and the pine cones that we see all over the world represent? Well, that knowledge was kept only for the highest people, like priests and kings. Only those at the top could understand what they meant. Throughout history, many ancient symbols have been deliberately twisted and corrupted over time to mean the opposite. This was an operation to prevent people from knowing the meaning of the symbols in front of them. While some symbols symbolize certain forces and could connect with and even activate those forces, they were portrayed as something evil, the opposite of what they were. The people who did this are those who protect knowledge and know how to build civilizations. They are the ones who started every major advanced civilization worldwide. It is normal that very few people at a very high level know this, because large masses of people were engaged in farming, hunting, drinking, fishing. Some of them were engaged in trade. They had no chance and no time to get any ideas. Let's explain this observation a little more. We have tried to understand the animal-headed figures we see in Anunnaki depictions, or on ancient Egyptian reliefs in the easiest way, and we have chosen to say that a lizard-headed figure symbolizes a reptilian race. But this was not just symbolic. We cannot read the description of some people in the Code of Hammurabi as having black heads, as meaning that these men had black heads. We have to think about what the black represents. We see that some depictions of the Anunnaki have eagle heads. In reality, they did not have eagle heads. In this case, they did not have snake heads either. This was a symbolic way of describing their mentality. When someone's mentality was focused on ruling through war and control and the masculine energy of creativity, it was always represented by the eagle symbol. That is the explanation of this symbol. And the snake was always represented by knowledge and wisdom. So in this case, that snake head was not meant to give a frightening image. It actually represented a very knowledgeable being. It was used in the sense that it was very smart, very knowledgeable, different from other people in the society around it, such as farmers, fishermen, workers. Now in this image, all these different images are brought together. I would like to show and explain some of them. Let's start with the figures at the top of the image. Here we have depictions of the Anunnaki. These are all Anunnaki, but why do they have different heads? If you notice, the middle one is a normal head while the other two have eagle heads. According to the symbolic language I mentioned, the eagle-headed image here is Ninurta. He is an ancient god of war. That's why he has an eagle head. Ninurta was known as the main influencer of the Roman Empire. And you can see that with the Ninurta symbol there. It represents having awareness about everything and knowing everything around you. The fact that it looks like it's looking left and right means knowing everything, but not knowing in the sense of knowledge. It meant being aware of everything, knowing what everyone was doing, being one step ahead of them. You can also find this double-headed eagle on the Byzantine coat of arms. Here is the Byzantine coat of arms. The Byzantine Empire was the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire. This figure is almost always holding a pine cone symbol. He is holding the pine cone and pointing in a certain direction. This detail teaches us something. When we look at the wall paintings of the Sumerians, we have to take into account that every little curve, every little mark, everything has a meaning. The Anunnaki figures they put in these designs are looking in the direction pointed by the pine cone they are holding in their hands. Now when you go to Rome, to the Vatican, in the square where the Pope comes forward and addresses everyone, in the heart of the Christian world, you find this huge pine cone symbol. This enormous pine cocoon is the largest in the world. There is also a pine cocoon made of wood on the Pope's staff. You can see this at the bottom. Another detail is the mitre hat he wears. Now let us take you to Mali, a country in West Africa. There are Dogon people living in Mali. This ancient tribe had an important knowledge of the sky and the stars before the invention of the first telescopes, without any contact with other cultures in the world. What was this tribe with celestial knowledge that was then little known even in Europe? In the 1930s, two French anthropologists visited them to get to know them and learn about their culture. These scientists stayed among them for a long time, and the Dogon trusted them after a certain period of time. It was true because they were only doing scientific work. It was through this trust that they gradually let them in on their secrets. The Dogons told the French anthropologists the detailed alignments and celestial movements of Sirius A, B, and even C, drawing them on the ground. But the French were busy with their own sciences. They knew nothing about astronomy or astrology. Even if they did, they couldn't understand it, because the stars Sirius B and C had not been discovered in the world at that time. They were discovered years after the first radio telescopes were built. And this culture had a huge amount of knowledge about our cosmos and our planet. They even went further and showed a Frenchman their famous cave. In front of the cave there was a guard. This was his lifelong duty. When he died, someone else would take over. Inside the cave, celestial maps were drawn. They said that one day the white man came and gave them all the information. It wasn't until the 1970s that the world learned about this in a book. It's called The Sirius Mystery. The author is Robert Temple. I didn't just get up and tell you about the Dogon. When we look at the descriptions of the Dogon, we see Oans, a snake-like fish that looks like a sea creature. Now look carefully. Oans has a hat on his head, and this hat shows us where the helmet hat that the Pope wears comes from. In Mesopotamia, there was a belief that knowledge was brought to people by Oans from the gods. Cuneiform texts show that Oans, a half-fish-shaped creature from the sea, taught Mesopotamian people many things from building houses to agriculture. And in these depictions, Oans is passing on knowledge to the Dogon people. So when we see the Pope today, we should understand him only as a reference to these ancient transmitters of knowledge. According to Mesopotamian legend, Oans was not just any god. but the leader of a group of beings known as the Seven Apostles, or Seven Sages. These seven sages are almost always depicted holding the famous bag. A detailed description of the seven sages is found in the works of the 3rd century Babylonian priest Berossos. According to Berossos, the seven sages came to Mesopotamia at a time when the first people living in the region lived lawlessly like wild animals. They brought advanced knowledge to these primitive people. We begin to wonder whether the bags that these seven sages are depicted holding permanently might have been some kind of identifier, a badge, for example, for these carriers of knowledge. Could these containers be symbols of authority for an initiatic brotherhood that has traveled far and wide, and whose ancient roots go back to the most distant prehistory? Could they not have the same kind of function as the Masonic handshake today? It could be an instant way of knowing who is an insider and who is not. In fact, Oannes was not really a sea creature or a fish. It was just a symbol to represent Enki. Because when you look at the cylinder seals of Enki, you can see that he was basically the god of fresh water, the god of balance. So all these things that we see in today's Christian religious institutions in the distorted realities of these symbols actually go back to a much older time when they are examined in their true meaning. We see the same thing with the swastika. All these things are either inverted or hidden, so we can no longer understand what they are. Pine cone imagery is found in many parts of the world. We see it in Hindu cultures and in ancient Egypt. We know that the pine cone represents knowledge, the passage of wisdom. We know that it represents our pineal gland in the human brain and its representation of our third eye. Apart from the pine cone, we know that this honeycomb hexagonal design represents the seeds of life, this intelligent design behind nature. The pine cone and the handbag are shared almost everywhere in the world. We can say that these symbols give us evidence of lost civilizations. This evidence is actually a clue, because for some reason these symbols that we find in different parts of the world are found in megalithic structures and places where things were built that were so sophisticated that it would have been impossible with Bronze Age tools. This confirms what I have been telling you in videos for years. There were very different and very advanced civilizations on Earth in ancient times, and the common sense of this civilization has reached us. The reason I say common sense is because the symbols are used in the same way. Now let's come to the most controversial symbol, the handbag symbol. There are many different theses about it. Some have said that the bag contains a mixture of psychedelic substances. It could be some kind of mushroom or a substance like LSD, which was widely used in the world in the 1960s. As you know, people who have taken LSD, mescaline, or some mushroom derivatives have reported that they have gone into very different dimensions and have seen reality that we cannot normally see. In Preston Dennett's book, Symmetry, the purpose of the satchel is explained as containing an encryption crystal that would allow a UFO pilot to interface with the artificial intelligence of a spacecraft. Since the crystal was unique to the pilot, each individual had to carry their own crystal. This encryption crystal allowed the pilot to telepathically interface with the craft for instructions. This is a view that implies extraterrestrials. Look, there's another interesting view. They say that by holding the briefcase, it allowed them to vibrate at a frequency that they could be seen in our dimension. The bag allowed them to occupy the same space-time as us. So a being from the fourth dimension could cross into our dimension for a while. So they could be seen by the human race. Some believe they have solved the mystery of the bags by taking a closer look at this hunting wall relief. Notice how the figures holding the bags are standing around the tree of life. It has been suggested that this tree of life looks suspiciously like a working Tesla coil, a device designed by Nikola Tesla in the late 1800s to transmit electricity wirelessly. If we go back to ancient Egypt, we can see that Tesla coils are repeatedly depicted in the most important temples of ancient depiction. In fact, many believe that the Ankh symbol, one of the most well-known symbols in ancient Egypt, is a true depiction of Tesla coil technology. Could this be possible? And if so, could the handbags carried by the figures represent some kind of tool that would harness this energy source, such as a rechargeable battery that uses the electricity generated by the Tesla coil to power an advanced ancient civilization? Following this theory, one can take a closer look at this Olmec carving of the god Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl meaning feathered serpent. Notice how he embraces a man holding a mysterious bag. Doesn't this man appear to be sitting inside some kind of machine, perhaps at the controls of a flying device? Given the conspicuous placement of the bag, is it possible that this is the energy source powering this machine? I have been saying in my videos for several years that there is information inside the bags. Sometimes it might be necessary to focus not only on the bag, but also on the person holding it. However, I said that those who carry intertemporal, interdimensional information are represented by this bag in their hands. Of course, this was also my idea. What do these bags really represent? Think about what the previous symbol represents. Could it be the transfer of knowledge? The transfer of knowledge to another individual, not just general knowledge, but higher knowledge, knowledge of everything. If you sit down and try to explain everything to somebody, you have to make them understand the balance of nature so that they understand knowledge from a higher level. You have to explain how consciousness, energy, cosmos, how to create a civilization. In order to do what they did in these empires in history, they first had to know what the individual needs. So what does the satchel represent? The satchel was the tools to create a civilization. So you sit with someone and give them the knowledge of pine cones. You are just saying something. You are giving them a knowledge. You make them understand them. It is one thing to have knowledge and to understand it, but how to create a civilization? How to design a civilization? What are the stages of that civilization? What is the morality for that civilization? How will that civilization be governed? What will be the rules? This symbol represents all the tools to create that civilization. These figures holding bags are the keepers of knowledge and how to create civilizations. They are the ones who laid the foundation for all the great advanced sophisticated civilizations all over the world. When we see lost civilizations, this is where these influences come from. The knowledge came from those who delivered it around the world in bags with pine cones and tools to create civilizations. If there was an advanced group that wanted to design the infrastructure for a planet, they needed these different tools and knowledge about what people were going to do, how to govern the world, how to clear river channels for agriculture, how to map the sky. Just like the evidence that these symbols show, we see all over the world that there have been catastrophic disasters in the world. And maybe not just in one time period, but maybe on a cyclical basis. It seems like every 12,000 years. So that some catastrophes are occurring, and so they could map out when events would occur, as well as understanding the energy of the cosmos. They knew which time period was happening on a larger level. These civilizations collectively collapsed around the world and left behind a series of catastrophes. When we look at the examples of the Greenland ice cores, like the erosion effects around the Sphinx in Egypt, or about 12,800 to 10,000 years ago, we see a very, very devastating catastrophe that probably occurred during multiple events. This catastrophe wiped out all these civilizations, or left only megalithic structures built without any writing, or in some cases cuneiform tablets made of this dirt. But admittedly, the idea that the message could be preserved by carving it in stone was a better solution. That's why there are very few remains of writing from these cultures anywhere in the world. Because if they had used paper or something digital, none of it would have survived. For years, when I talk about Atlantis and Mu, the first thing I am asked is, if they reached such a great civilization, why can't we see any traces of them? This question is natural for those who have not grasped the magnitude of the catastrophe, and also for those who have forgotten the dates of the events. What we can say about Atlantis goes no further than what Plato told us. He heard the story from Solon. Solon was the first Greek sage who went to Egypt in ancient Greece and was initiated by the priests there. The Egyptian priests passed on the knowledge to him. But the thing that will help us solve the bag and knowledge issue is in our country. Thanks to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the pieces of the puzzle are starting to fit together. One of the columns unearthed so far in Göbekli Tepe is very valuable for our subject. This column is called column number 43. When we look at this column, we see handbags carved at the top. It is hard not to think that the stories of Owans and Quetzalcoatl represent the arrival of the same carriers of knowledge. Since its discovery in the 1990s, there has been a debate about the purpose of Göbekli Tepe. Some suggest that it was a religious site, while others believe it has astronomical meanings. But the most intriguing explanation was presented in 2017 by two scientists, Martin Swidman and Dimitrios Sikridis. They believe that Göbekli Tepe's famous column 43 provided a timestamp for a terrible event in human history. The event was a comet impact. The comet fragments falling to Earth are represented in the wavy lines and squares of the forest, and the headless man at the bottom symbolizes the unfolding catastrophe. More importantly, according to Swidman and Sikridis, this is the image of ancient constellations that appeared in the night sky at the time of the comet impact. Surprisingly, when Swidman and Sikridis looked for a time in history when the constellations appeared to line up in column 43, they found the year 10,950 BC. That's exactly when the Young Dryas event took place. For those who don't know, the Younger Dryas was a 1300-year event that plunged much of the world into Ice Age conditions, super tsunamis, and massive worldwide flooding. While the existence of the Younger Dryas is not disputed, scientists have never been entirely sure what caused it. According to Swidman and Sikridis, Göbekli Tepe provided the answer. They believe that after the end of the Young Dryas, survivors commemorated their survival and the restoration of civilization at Göbekli Tepe, even recording the date of the catastrophe and what caused it on the famous column number 43. But if this is true, what other answers might column 43 provide? Let's examine those too. First, let's look at what comes under the symbols of the satchel. We see a vulture. Above the arm of the vulture, we see something circular, which the two researchers we just described suggested was a comet or an asteroid. Let's continue deciphering the milk. Above are the bags. Just below, we see a vulture and a scorpion. If we align these two animals to the sky, we see stars known as Cygnus and Scorpius, which bear a striking resemblance to the shapes represented by these images. And now look very carefully that they are aligned. They are not only shown in this cosmological diagram, they are also shown in exactly the same position to each other. Take a look at Cygnus, and below it Scorpius. Now we realize that Cygnus is connected to a star above it. Look at the wing of the vulture. there is a star just above its wing. This star is called Deneb, and it is one of the brightest stars in the whole galaxy. And a star that bright is located exactly above Cygnus. But this is not a coincidence. Let's move on to the symbols. Consider one of the oldest symbols, the cross. By the way, the cross is a symbol that predates the Christian religion by thousands of years. It is actually one of the Anunnaki symbols that we will show in this mural. And let's clarify this as well. The cross represents the intersection of energy, mind, body, and spirit. The three basic elements to achieve the ascension of human beings. This is what has been taught throughout history. Here, by chance, Cygnus represents a constellation in the shape of a cross, and one of the brightest stars in our entire galaxy is at the top of the cross, which essentially represents ascension. That's why in this depiction from Göbekli Tepe we find Cygnus and Scorpius right above the handbags. Now we want people to think about this a little bit. What does this mean? Are these the beings that provide the tools? We are in a situation that raises endless questions about this. But we want people to think about what is shown by this, and how it is just above these handbag symbols. Now there's another interesting piece of the puzzle. It's no coincidence that Cygnus and Scorpius are located in the 1000th dark pit of our galaxy. The dark trough, called the Dark Rift, is the region of our galaxy with the highest amount of dark energy. For those who don't know what dark energy is, it exists as a balance system. What is above is below, like heaven and hell. We should think of it as higher and lower dimensions. Dark matter may be the equivalent of the underworld for our planet, but the galaxy is also opposed to matter. Everything is always in balance. Now this Anunnaki wall relief you see here is very valuable in terms of its history. The tree of life, the handbag, the pine cone are all depicted together. Let's evaluate this relief in the light of our knowledge. When you know what a pine cone means, you put that piece in its place. Then you understand how they are holding a handbag. You put that piece in its place. You realize that the beings with wings represent gods, ascended beings from other dimensions. And you put that piece back. And what do you get? You get a depiction that tells the whole story of what happened here in the past to create sophisticated civilizations. Now let's break it down. We see that the two people in the center are around what is called the Tree of Life, and there is one other person behind them. On top of the Tree of Life in the center is Anu and the winged sun disk. Now Anu seems to be turning the wheels of this tree, this balance of life. And when we dig deeper into these Anunnakis, we find that they were obsessive about maintaining the balance. They have done a lot of bad things here. But because of that, they had to take on certain roles and responsibilities to regain that balance. And whatever you look at, we always see this obsession. That's why the Tree of Life is always depicted. This is the balance of life. This is the balance of nature, the creation of life. Everything is supervised by the Anunnakis according to them. It is their responsibility, or so they think. By seeing only 4 Anunnaki here, we should not get the wrong idea that this is all Anunnaki. To understand this, look carefully at what they wear on their heads as well as the wings. Anunnaki are always shown the same way if they show their physical head without a snake or an eagle. They have horns. They have horns with rings around their helmets. And there are always 3. That means 2 individuals on the outside. And it doesn't actually happen on either side. Remember, it represents both sides. The right balance. 2 at each end, and 2 kings in the center. Now the kings are the same size as the Anunnaki. And as I said, some things have to be taken literally. But some things are symbolic. They're the same height as the Anunnaki. Now look, I'm going to make a statement here that I don't agree with. This is of course a thesis, and I believe that everybody should make his own interpretation. The Anunnaki are not reptiles. One view is that we were created in their image or likeness. So we are them. So let's look at all the Mesopotamian kings that have been depicted throughout history. When we look at Ur-Nammu, when we look at Hammurabi, when we look at Shinnan-Heriba, when we look at Sinai-Heriba, when we look at Assyria-Banipal, notice that they all look exactly like Anunnaki. It's like they are imitating them, don't they? They have long hair. It's all braided. But what don't they have? Notice what's on their heads. They don't have any horns. They have a completely different symbol on their heads. And no handbag or pine cone. See? This is the point where it tells us a story. So it's like we're explaining everything. The Anunnaki were descended from a bloodline of kings called the Nephilim. They had bloodline king descendants called the Nephilim. When we look at Genesis, when we look at the book of Enoch, when we look at all the old stories from the past, we know that there was a lot of talk about this, and that once upon a time there were giants. The kings were not really what we think they were. In fact, the bloodline Anunnaki king came directly from the bloodline, and so their obsession here was to make sure that their descendants ruled over society. These kings are the direct bloodline kings of the Anunnaki. They gave their knowledge and wisdom to create civilization, and that is why they are depicted in the center around the Tree of Life. Now notice what they carry in their left arms. They have what is known as the masculine wand of rulership of the reigns of men. And most ancient civilizations were run by men. There were civilizations in some parts of Africa that were ruled by women. And again, in some parts of Africa, there were women, queens, and reigns. But most importantly, right next to them, in the middle of Anatolia, there was a period of mother goddesses, the exact opposite of them. Mother goddesses starting with Cybele and continuing with Artemis and Aphrodite. But most of the time these bloodline men, these masculine rulers, would take over and rule the society. And they are really depicted here at the center. They have the masculine wand. And look what they're doing. Here, as you can see, they are showing the way. It's their way or nothing. They're passing on the rules and responsibilities that the Anunnaki gave them. It's almost like an embassy of someone very powerful. They are the ones who are tasked with creating a civilization using all this knowledge and tools. There is knowledge and certain laws that are passed on to them. They all came together under the name of the kingdom. Everywhere there was the same expression: kingdom. But basically there was a belief that the Anunnaki were these bloodline kings. And they thought they should rule the rest of society. They tell them how to build civilizations and how to rule. And in the center is the Zoroastrianism icon of Anu almost pulling the wheels on the bicycle of life. He is depicted as the one who is above all the Anunnaki and the balance. When you put all these views together, it seems that the Anunnaki have created a certain kind of kingdom civilization for our societies here in their own image, in their own selvas, in their own minds. And look, there is another interesting event here. But if we go back a little bit, we realize that they are usually depicted with an eagle's head. It's not a regular head or a snake head. It's actually quite rare. What could that mean? It means that the Anunnaki often created these civilizations and made them into warrior empires. That's why we've always been ruled by war throughout history, because that is the easiest way to control civilizations and keep them at a lower level of consciousness. And one more thing should not be forgotten. There was also a war between the Anunnaki. Finally, let me add another piece of information. Some of the branch of the Anunnaki in Sumer went to the Khazar state. Here they lived among the Turks and the nation that formed the Khazar kingdom. Some families from that branch moved first to Poland and then to Germany. The most famous among those families is the Rothschild family. It was a long and detailed video. I hope it attracted your attention. Take care.